what is the best economy that a government or a country should adopt? It's something that for centuries people have debated about. And many people, including myself, often agree that it isn't a singular economy that a nation should adopt, but rather a mix of them. Within the economic system model, we have three distinct types of economy. We have the market economy, the economy, and also the traditional economy. Now, within the market economy, you basically dictate all of the economic processes through a market, which is basically where competition can occur. In a command economy, all economic processes are dictated by the government in a centralized manner. And in a traditional economy, this is the least common type of economy, and it's pretty much extinct except for some regions within developing nations such as within Africa and Asia. And the traditional economy usually is dictated, all of its economic processes are dictated through traditions, what has happened for years and years on end, right? So all of that makes sense. Now, in my personal opinion, I believe that a mixed economic system, which will include features from both your market and command economy, is the best way of moving forward. And we see that very prevalent within succeeding nations such as United States, even though it's the epicenter of capitalism, such as within New York, within Wall Street, and these major financial institutions, which preach capitalism. The U.S. has a lot of command features or socialist features, things like a social fall net, right? People who have lost jobs, they can usually rely on the government for a little bit before getting back on their feet. Free education, public transport, even though the transport isn't free, it is owned and operated by the government within places such as New York City, right? And there's also been a recent push to democratize access to that service by offering it for free. So, again, the point I'm trying to make is that even in nations that we know are very capitalist and they preach pro capitalism, there are still socialist slash command features embedded in their economy. The same can be true in the opposite way. Communist countries, countries where we think that it's mostly dictated, like the economic processes are mostly dictated by the government, have some, at the very least, some market economy features. An example of this would be China. Within China, there are special economic zones, such as in Beijing, where capitalism is actually allowed to be practiced in full swing. There are markets where companies can enter and compete in, even though it is a communist or socialist government. And private organizations are allowed to exist as well. I work in the AI space, and many of the new AI models which are coming out and performing very well are coming from China. Things like Quen or Minimax. These are all models which were produced by private Chinese AI labs, such as Moonshot Labs or Alibaba, which is actually a conglomerate like Google. The only difference would be that for this to operate properly, like for these companies to legally operate, they can't just be wholly private owned. There has to be some sort of government involvement, which comes in the form of ownership. Usually the government comes in as a partner and helps dictate some of the decisions that the company makes. But what I'm trying to say is that even though these both in both cases, right, in countries which are known for capitalism and countries which are known for communism, even though these countries heavily promote their ideologies, the reality is they wouldn't be able to function without borrowing some of the features from their opposing side, from their rivals, right? Their contrasting ideologies. So the reason now why I support a capitalist heavy system, because the distribution, or the amount of market features compared to command features, doesn't necessarily need to be 50-50. It could be an uneven distribution, and for me, uh, I tend to weigh in the more pro-capitalist end of the argument. And the reason for that is a lot, and I'm going to explain it. But to start off, we need to understand what these three systems preach, and to do that, there's essentially three different questions which need to be fulfilled, right? Because ultimately, the study of economics only needs to happen because scarcity exists. We as humans have unlimited, unwarranted amount of wants, but the amount of resources to fulfill those wants is limited. And because of that, we need some way to basically organize and distribute the limited resources to build products and build goods and services off of it, because not all of our wants will be fulfilled, right? For example, I want a giant spacecraft, right? I want everybody within, obviously this is just an example, but I want everybody in my community to have a giant spacecraft, and they all want it as well. That is a want we have as a society. Now, the resources to build a spacecraft is insane. There's so much things that go into building a spacecraft. Um, let's leave aside the raw materials which are needed, which is a lot. But even just the labor which is needed, you need highly skilled rocket engineers, rocket scientists. You need software engineers to build out these unique softwares which haven't really been seen outside of the industry. It takes a lot of resources to build a spacecraft, so it just can't just happen for everybody, right? And that's sort of the main reason why we have economics. All right. Now, within the first system, which is the market system, the three questions, which are essentially what to produce, how are we going to produce it, and the last one would be who gets those productions. Okay, and this is talking about goods and services. Within the market system, all of that's dictated by the market. What to produce? Well, that's dictated by dollar votes. Essentially, every time a person spends money on a product, they're voting to keep that product in production, because companies will see that, hey, a lot of people love this product, and because they love this product, let's keep it going. Let's not stop its production. Whereas if an organization started producing something that was badly received, right? Within this day and age, that would be like starting a phone company and producing a flip phone. Yeah, you'll get some customers, especially from the older demographic, but newer customers, I would say under 70 even, they're not going to want to buy your product anymore. That product is obsolete now. Nobody wants to buy flip phones. So your dollar votes are going to be so less, meaning that your sales or your revenue will be so low that you'll either be forced to pivot into smartphones or into another sector, or close down. And this is what happened in the 2010s when smartphones really started taking off. In 2007, you had the iPhone being launched by Steve Jobs, and companies were current phone companies at that time were very skeptical in adopting smartphones. They thought it wasn't worth it. But then, obviously, over time, they started pivoting. They were forced to pivot. And the companies who didn't pivot in the beginning lost their edge, right? And it became super competitive in these spaces, as other companies were developing from the start, right? From 2008, 2007, they were already starting to build out these smartphones which competed with Apple's phone. And obviously Apple was the first one to perfect it, so they had a huge share as well. So, companies like BlackBerry, who were like very, very slow to implementing smartphones, they lost their market share. And eventually they were actually forced to pivot into cybersecurity space. That's what they do now. But again, all of this is just to show you that basically whatever the consumer wants, the consumer will get. So ultimately, at the end, it boils down to whatever the consumer wants. The people who are paying for your product, they decide what you're going to be producing. And if you don't produce it, if you choose not to listen to the customer, well then your business will suffer, and eventually you'll have to declare bankruptcy because of the poor amount of sales that you get. Now, how do you produce it? Now, as it says over here, basically the producers, which are these companies, they have to find the lowest cost for production. And the reason for that is the consumers dictate how they're going to buy goods and services. They're the ones who get the goods and services, right? So these are people, and they naturally want to get the lowest cost for the highest return. That's just how human nature works. We want to do the lowest amount of work or the lowest amount of energy being spent on something and get the highest return off of it. And money is a commodity which comes from hard work, right? Money doesn't just come for free, at least for like the 99% of people. You have to work hard for it through your businesses or through studying and getting a good job, right? Whatever it may be, you earn that money. So you don't want to just go ahead and spend it willy-nilly. You want to spend it in places where you'll get the highest value for the product, and that comes from paying the lowest amount of money. So producers have to realize that if they want to be competitive, they have to keep their prices as low as possible. Or else these consumers, they're not going to be loyal to you. They will move on. They will find other producers, other companies who give them a better value, a better price for the same product. And we see this within the AI domain, actually. When AI initially became popularized, AI was already there for a very, very long time, but it wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is now. But when it was there in 2022, it was starting to gain its popularity, through the advent of ChatGPT. The API credits, these are things that are used by developers to build systems and build, apps. The credits to use this API, this app, which developers can, employ into their own solutions. It was around $60 for 1 million tokens. Okay? You don't need to know what tokens are, but just let that sink in. $60 for 1 million tokens. Now, that was for GPT-3 Da Vinci. So it was a state of the model back then. Now, fast forward to now, present day. GPT 5.4 is the highest frontier model that GPT has produced. ChatGPT or OpenAI has produced so far. For the same 1 million tokens, it costs about $2 now. $2. That's it. And that comes from these companies realizing that more competitors are entering their space, right? You only had really ChatGPT back in 2022. There wasn't any other frontier LLM or this frontier chatbot that can generate natural human language. But now there's so many options. You got Claude, Gemini, Grok, these Chinese models which are giving out their whole solutions for free. They're giving out these models in open source, so you can just host it yourself. So that's the cutthroat competition that's being presented in this AI space now. So to be competitive, ChatGPT had to find lower ways to produce and maintain their service. And that comes from optimizing infrastructure, finding ways to lower the cost of that infrastructure, maybe through like strategic investments and deals with like Nvidia, for example. And so that's just one example showing you how a company, to stay relevant and stay competitive, had to lower their price, and that happened within the span of only 4 years of its initial launch. Now, who do they produce it? Now, that comes from the value you produce. Okay? And I'm not talking about and when I say value, I'm not talking about like value in the sense of how valuable your work is, but how in demand your work is. And this is an argument that many people have, right? They'll say that, a doctor does so much more to society than a basketball player. And that is fundamentally true. A doctor saves lives. They do so much within the progression of modern medicine, which helps elongate our lives, right? Doctors are the ones who have helped us so much, yet they receive so little in return for the sacrifice they give, right? Don't get me wrong, they're very reasonably paid. They get paid over 200,000 salaries at the minimum, but that comes at the cost of like 10, 15 years of schooling where they're dead broke and they're just surviving. They get paid $8 an hour usually for their residencies. So it is a very tough career choice if you want to get into medicine. And you're doing all of that just for $400,000. And then you have basketball players. Yes, don't get me wrong. It is a lot of work to become a basketball player. It is not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Oftentimes, these players will start as young as 5, starting to train very, very rigorously and being disciplined in their training. And even then, they might not make it to the professional level. It is a very, very tough career choice. And that's not really the reason why they're paid so much. That's not the reason why they're paid 500 ridiculous contracts of like 500 million. No. And this is not exclusive to, sports even. But I'm talking about like executives too. Oftentimes CEOs don't really do that much per se. But the reason why these people are paid so much is not because it's hard to become that role. That's just a side consequence to being in demand. People want to see sports. They love to see sports. They pay so much money to see sports. And because of that, basketball players are rewarded generously. Or else, why would they play, right? There's this high demand. They see so many people coming into their stadiums and then they're only getting paid 70,000. That's ridiculous. They'll just stop working then. There needs to be an incentive for them to work, and that comes from that high salary. Whereas doctors are still in demand. Don't get me wrong. They're still highly in demand, but not as much as in demand as a basketball player. So that's basically when I talk about, producing something, providing value. I'm not talking about society as a whole, but within the economy itself. Now, when it says, determined by how much you produce of what is in demand, it's basically talking about you producing things that people want, and then you getting rewarded for that in the medium of money, right? You get money for it, and then you can use that money to buy stuff, which is the production of goods and services that companies pumped out into the economy. Now, there are advantages to the system. As it says, you get high quality and a variety of inexpensive goods, which happens because of how the production of these goods happen and the competition element of these market systems. And there's also consumer sovereignty. That's a huge one. Consumers can choose to buy things and they can choose not to. I could have chosen to go to the mall today and buy a new keyboard, for example. But I had the free choice to say, no, I don't need that, so I'm not going to go. Right? So there's that freedom element. But there are some disadvantages. And the first one is income inequality. Within these systems, naturally what happens is if they're pure, the system will basically polarize wealth. It will end up in the hands of the ultra wealthy, and it will leave nothing for the working class. And it will also lead to instability because of this. It will create tension among the society as, normal citizens start becoming upset that they're working so hard. They're trying their very, very best. They're going to high schools, getting high grades, doing as much as they can to provide value within the economy, but they're getting very, very little. And these ultra wealthy people, they don't have to do much now. They've accumulated their wealth. All they have to do is suppress the bottom 99% or 98% of people, and they'll be fine. So that creates instability. And there's also problems with the market as well. You have negative external effects. This is essentially effects that we see outside of the economy, right? Outside of the economic understanding, and that's things like pollution. When you force producers to make low-cost production processes, that'll come often at the cost of the environment or the cost of basically anything that can happen, right? Again, this is talking about a pure market system where there's no government intervention. Companies can start, and this unfortunately happens in some places, they can start enlisting the help of child laborers and not pay them enough because these children don't know any better. They can start polluting the environment by performing unethical waste disposal methods, right, to reduce their bottom line. These are all problems that will cause a lot of harm within our society. And this is why I say we need command features even in a capitalist system. Because if we have some government intervention, right, which is what a command feature does, it will add a government intervention into some sort of process of the market system. And in this case, it'll come from adding regulatory measures to ensure that unethical practices aren't being done to reduce the production costs, right? So we have child labor laws to ensure that children are protected. We have fines for damaging the environment. So, those are just some of those problems. You also have internal effects. These are effects on the economy itself. And the main one is monopolies, and specifically a concept known as market power. As companies start dominating within an industry, they will start suppressing their competition, right? They'll start either buying them out, offering them such a good deal that, they have to take it, right? Or they will start, pressuring them into closing down. For a company like Google, for example, they have a ridiculous amount of capital. So what they often do, what I've noticed at least, is that they will offer a service for free or for dirt cheap when they're just beginning it. And more people start adopting that service then. And they can afford it because they have so much capital that, running a data center or like 10,000 data centers, for example, to keep that service alive, that digital service alive for 3 years and not charging a dime to any users will not hurt them in any significant way. Most other companies cannot relate to that. They cannot do that. They don't have the power to do that. So what that means is, again, that comes into the effect of humans. We see a free product which gives us the same quality of service as other companies. So why wouldn't we use that free product in lieu of that service or of the other companies? And I saw this with Gemini in particular, right? Gemini is the AI that Google has produced, and they gave dirt cheap rates. It was practically free for AI coding services. And they also gave very generous free tier amounts. And this was all done in the effort to basically reduce the competition from OpenAI, which is, don't get me wrong, they have a lot of resources, but they don't have as much resources as Google, right? And other companies as well, like Anthropic, which has not nearly enough to compete with Google's resources. But yeah, this stuff can happen, and that's why we have like a competition bureau, which kind of regulates this foul play to ensure that there still exists some competition. One example of like the government stepping in Canada was in the telecommunication industry. That is heavily dominated by like just like four players. You have TELUS, Rogers, Bell. That's pretty much it. So like actually really three, right? If I actually search up the top four telecommunication companies in Canada, yeah, you'll see that it's really just Bell, Rogers, and TELUS. And then this one, I believe, is for Quebec. Yeah, so serving really Quebec. So not necessarily something that is nationally being operated. So this Quebecer is also not a huge company that's dominating. So yeah, and because of this unhealthy competition, because what will happen is when you have these large companies that are basically there's only like three companies which like basically run the telecommunication industry, they will collude. Sometimes what will happen, and this has happened before, there's been cases in Canada of this happening. What they will do is they will basically get together and they'll say, you know what, let's increase the average price. This will benefit all of us, right? Because then we're not competing on price. We're going to be competing on the quality of the product. So either way, we're still making more money, right? And what they'll do is essentially 1 week, one of these companies will increase their prices. Second week, the other company will increase these prices. Third week, the other company will increase their prices. So the consumers have no other option but these three companies, and all three of these companies have increased their prices. So price doesn't become the factor that these consumers will then be using to choose what company that they should, do business with. Instead, it would be like the quality of the service. In the case of like telecommunications, the coverage that's provided, the amenities or like the perks, the benefits of their plan, things of that nature. But the price goes away. The price does not become the factor. And so this has happened before, and that's why monopolies are so dangerous, because they do what a communist system would do, and that is centralize the economic system into the hands of not even the government, but these business executives who don't care about public interest. They care about the interests of their shareholders, if that, and mainly the interest of themselves, which is to gain as much wealth as possible and use that wealth to levy a better life. Okay, but that's the market system. Now in the command system, all three of these problems, they're solved by governments, and specifically the government committees. So the government decides to focus on the production of goods and services, and that means usually that you're not going to have, luxury items, because the government is representing public interest, and the public interest will first and foremost always be essential items, such as, food, toiletries, housing, shelter, these things. It wouldn't be something like a phone, right? Though you can argue nowadays a phone is necessary to live and function within the world. However, it's not needed to live, right? But yeah, essentially the government decides what to produce on, and they are again the ones who decide how that will be produced. They will open up factories, employ people, and usually within within countries that are dominated by this feature, most citizens work for the government because there's a very little, if that, of a private sector. Usually, the private sector is negligible. Again, for whom the government decides how to distribute the production of goods and services. It isn't like in a market economy where, if you provide the most value in terms of what is in demand, you will be able to purchase more things, right? And you'll be able to get an unequal amount of the goods and services. It's not like that in a command economy. You still do your labor, but the sharing of the productions of goods and services, those are dictated by the government and usually on the basis of equality. Essentially, what is needed for each of the citizens, and distributing it based off of that instead of based off of like productivity, perhaps. And if a communist system has that, like a government or a country has like a sharing or distribution mechanism where they reward productivity, well then they're mixing in some market elements, because again, no model really exists in its pure state. Now, because of all of this, it leads to poor quality of goods and services and shortages as well. And the reason for all this happening is because the government is centralizing the economy. They're at the very top of the economic model, and they are the ones that are planning everything. They're the ones who are executing everything. And that's very complex. Running an economy isn't an easy task. So there's bound to be some mistakes that happen. And because of that, production will suffer, which will lead to lower quality of goods. If you compare a car from the Soviet Union to a car from America, you'll notice a very huge difference in terms of the quality. Now, this happens because of the reason that I just told you, of the fact that mismanagement is bound to happen, but it will also happen because within a command economy, they reward efficiency over effectiveness. The quality of your goods and services is not as important as getting out as much goods and services as possible. And also, this is an obvious one, but there's a lack of freedom, right? Within a command economy, the government controls everything. And because of that, they are able to control the lives of their citizens. I mean, just look at North Korea. Look at China. These are like authoritarian states which have been prompted by the communist model and the one-party state solution. Now, traditional economy, I'm not really going to go through this too much, but essentially, again, what, how, whom, all of that is dictated by tradition, what has been going on for years and years on end. And because of that, it's very stable. Everybody knows their role and they're happy within their role. And it's, again, environmentally friendly because they detest the use of modern solutions, which often bring the cost of environmental pollution. But the disadvantages of this is the very design of this economy is to stay within the past. Do not change what has been going on for centuries on end, and because of that, no new technology will be adopted and used. And that means that no innovation can occur within that system, and that's why it's not that prevalent within society. Okay, now, the reason why I say we should have a heavy market system with some command features is because it provides the best of both worlds. You can have equality. Now, I'm not saying equality in terms of income equality or equity even, right? So yeah, that's a really good distinction that should be made. Income inequity and income inequality mean two different things. The market economy cannot exist if there is income equality. That is to say, everybody has the same amount of wealth or very similar amounts of wealth. There needs to be people who are poor and there needs to be people who are rich. But there shouldn't be people who are poor that cannot become rich, right? It shouldn't be that, if a poor person wants to become rich, if they want to become a millionaire or even a billionaire, they cannot. It's physically impossible for them to within that system, and that's what a pure market system does, because there's income inequity. Inequity means that it's not about inequality anymore, but it's about these people, the poor people and regular people, being unable to gain a higher status within wealth. They cannot enjoy the beauty of the market system because of the fact that the ultra wealthy are actively suppressing them and not allowing them to move forward and move higher up in the I guess the command chain of social hierarchy within a market economy, which would be dictated by wealth, how much money you have. Right? So income inequality will exist, but that doesn't mean a person cannot move from being poor to rich. Especially in America, you can do that. That's why there's the American dream, right? You can easily go from, not easily, I'm not saying it's an easy process. It shouldn't be an easy process. That's why it's unequal. But it's not impossible for you to go from dirt poor to being a multimillionaire. And many people have done it before, right? And the way that happens is, ironically, through a command feature. And that command feature is essentially distributing, or I should say redistributing, wealth to the poor. But here's the thing. My opinion on that is a little different, in that I don't believe that the ultra wealthy or even like the wealthy should have to redistribute their wealth per se. Rather, they should be paying into tax systems, and that money is being recycled into the government, but that money isn't going directly to people who are poor. That money instead should be invested into infrastructure that actively provide resources and the tools necessary for low-income individuals to become high earners. Whether that be giving free tuition, which happens a lot of the times, especially in institutions such as Ivy Leagues. They provide need-based grants, which make it easier for lower income individuals to attend their institutions and get access to networking and stuff like that. But yeah, there definitely should be that in terms of education, but also in terms of providing grants to start businesses or investment opportunities. It's basically providing the principle that, or applying the principle of a phrase that many people have heard. Give a man a fish, he'll eat for one day. Give a man the skill of fishing, the tool to gain fishes, and he'll eat for the rest of his life. Right? Giving people money will not help them. That money will be spent and gone, and then what are they gonna do, right? They'll still be stuck within that loop of failure and of struggle. But if you provide them with the tools and the resources necessary to succeed, well, then it's on them. Here, you have all the resources. You have good college education that is being subsidized for you. All you need is to study and provide good grades. And if there's extingent circumstances, organizations or educational organizations do understand that to a certain extent. So you have that available to your disposal. you have grants which are being given to low income individuals, even right now, right? They're given to low income individuals. You have that, so use them. You have nonprofits that you can turn to, food banks that you can go to. So you have all the tools. All you need to do is apply them. And it isn't easy. No one said it was going to be easy. But that's the world we live in. And many people will argue, well, within the market economy, like, again, I'm not saying pure market economy, but within a market economy, heavily dominated by market features, you're going to have people who haven't worked a day in their lives, trust fund babies. These people get into Ivy League schools with a 2.3 GPA, and that's simply because their parents were legacies. They were legacies because of their parents, their grandparents, and so these schools allowed them in. Their parents have spent a substantial amount of money in the donation process, and so they get into these organizations. They barely pass, and if they pass, whatever, they get the degree. It doesn't really mean anything because they're not going to use it, and they're just living life on easy mode. That's what I mean. They're living life on easy mode. Yes, that's bound to happen. You're going to have people who will not work hard and will have everything in life in terms of wealth. Obviously, there's more to life than that, but in terms of wealth, they're well off. But that is the natural state of the world. No economic system is going to fix that. That's the reality, right? Because in a command system, right, people say, oh, command system can fix that, right? We can get rid of these leeches, essentially, on society by purging them, which is a very horrible way of doing it. And that's happened through policies by Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin. So you can do that. Or, just taking away, seizing their assets. That's also happened under these tyrannical governments. So yeah, you could do that. That is an option. And then imposing, a heavy command economy. But then what happens is the very people who say that will become the tyrants that you grew to hate. Right? They will preach that, there's these people in the world who do nothing. You do everything. You work so hard for everything that you have. And yet these people don't do anything and they have much more than you will ever dream of. Let's take it back. And in the very same breath, they will set up an organization of government where they're at the very top and no one can suppress them. And anybody who dares to speak against them or who dares to try to democratize the process of government will be killed and purged. And that's happened through cases like Lenin Trotsky, who was brutally murdered in Mexico City, right, by Soviet agents. And that was because he tried to democratize the USSR. And that happens because the command economy, by its nature, is very centralized. It centralizes all of the control of the economy into the government. And that makes the government this super powerful entity, right? The market economy, when it's combined with the command economy features, some command economy features, still keeps the government powerful, but not nearly powerful enough to disrupt citizens' lives if it was left in the hands of a tyrant.